have nearly enough information to make a decision that is actually in the best interest of the child, because you just don't know the child yet. Individual assessment involves weeks of gathering information about just one child, from the child itself, about their backgrounds, about the things they struggle with, about who is their best friend in the institution. That seems like trivial information, but it's not. Because when you're looking at which children to put together in one home, if you put best friends together in the one home, if that's possible, and best for both of those children, the placement is more likely to work. If you know that a child struggles enormously with sleeping in the dark, if you inform the foster parents that this is an issue and that a tiny nightlight solves that, they can save themselves nights of screaming and screaming and screaming and not sleeping and bringing the child back, because this is never going to work. You need all this kind of little information, and not just from the child's teacher, any relatives that the child still has, any medical professionals who work with the child. If there is a counselor or a social worker with the child, you want that information from all of them. And then when you have that enormous mountain of information on the child, you can put a team together to look over that, look through that, and see what is possible. Is it possible and safe for this child to go back to their family? And if they were going back to their family, what kind of support would be needed to make that successful? What kind of preparation is this child going to need if they are going to go back to their family? If they can't go back to their parents safely, are there other relatives who might be able to support the child? What kind of support would they need? Is the child still in contact with those relatives, or do we need to build up a new relationship before we start even thinking about moving them? If that's not possible, if there are no relatives at all, is the child free for adoption, or can the child be made free for adoption and given a permanent solution in the form of an adoptive parent? Or if that's not possible, is there a possibility of putting them in a foster family? All these things need to be considered in the view of all this information. And then once the decision has been made, you need to start to train the people that the child is going to live with. And this is a relatively easy sell when you say, okay, you can be foster parents, but we will only allow you to foster this child if you let us train you. The hard sell is to say to parents, to get your child back, you need to sit through this training. Because they're like, it's my child. Yes, but the child that comes back is not the child that left home 6 years ago. And the child has been through a lot. Their development has changed. There is now challenging behavior due to institutionalization. And if we don't provide you with training, you are not going to be able to cope with this child. You're going to end up bringing them back. And it's going to be really hard to convince parents that they should really allow you to do this. But let's say we have all of that in place. All those decisions have been made. Surely now we can just hand the child over. No, we're not there yet. The child cannot just be waved off at the door. The child needs counseling. The child needs to be told about what's going to happen and have an explanation. Ideally, the child should be involved in the later stages of the decision taking, if it is appropriate to their age and developmental level. And there needs to be a period where the child can gradually become familiar with the people they are going to live with. First, short visits of the parents to the child, then of the child to the parents, so that they get familiar not just with the people but also with the place where they're going to live, so that when they're thinking of, I'm going to be sent away, they don't think of just having to walk out that familiar door and being, I don't know where, but they actually know when I'm going, my bed is there and the nightstand is next to it. They know where they are going. They have a picture in their head of where they will be going, and that will make the transition much easier. It will make the success of the placement much more likely. So there's so many different details, and that can be daunting when you start something like this. But it can be done. It's just a question of making sure that you take the steps slowly, and that every time you come to a new step that you look around and see if you can get someone to support you or give you more information and guidance on that step. And so that's also how I started with Snehalaya. I started there when I was still doing orphanage projects, so I started there helping them improve the care system inside their rehabilitation center, which at the time housed nearly 300 children. And as there I got more involved in family-based care, I also started to kind of mention it there. My training to the caregivers from the very start has included the information of what the effect on children of lack of attention, attachment, physical contact, and stimulation is. And those are the things that cause damage. The lack of that is what causes the damage of living in CCIs. That was always part of caregiver training that I've given. Years and years, over a decade ago, I started doing that. Now I've expanded that into trauma-informed care, so understanding what happens to a child. So with Snehalaya as well, I started by doing this as caregiver training, and then I started to do it as awareness raising with the management to show them that, first of all, they had the opportunities to do something about this, and also that they were taking care of these children, as almost all CCIs are, with the best of intentions, with the intention of giving them a better life. But that despite their best efforts, institutional care doesn't really allow you to do that. That's just an inherent problem with the system, not with the people who are trying to help the children. And so gradually, it always takes time, and gradually we came to the point where we're now really starting to explore family-based care, and we also want to share as the knowledge builds in Snehalaya. We also want to share that with people around, and we're trying eventually to also make a model that can be shared and rolled out. And one of the arguments I made at Snehalaya, which is relevant for everyone involved in institutional care anywhere in the world at the moment, is that there is an enormous global movement towards family-based care. The reputation of running a CCI, which used to be a very respectable thing, is crumbling. That's in part because people become aware of the harm that even very good institutional care does. In part, it's because with all the money that has been brought in CCIs, particularly through foreign donations, an orphanage industry has started. So there are people who realize you can get foreign donations this way, and they've started recruiting children, taking them away from poor families so that they could say, we have orphans here, please give us money. And the worst of those have realized that if you keep these children malnourished and in very poor conditions, you will actually get more money. So that's what they do. And because that exists, and because there is more awareness of the fact that that exists, it's not so respectable anymore being in charge of a CCI now. It's not seen as quite such a lofty thing as it used to be. And this means that globally the pressure on the removal of institutional care is growing stronger and stronger. In the EU right now, there has already been a successful lobby which has accomplished that if a country wants EU money, they have to show that not a single cent of that is going to go towards institutional care. This means that if a country wants this kind of aid, and that's going to expand to US aid, that's going to expand to World Bank aid, then they are essentially going to have to show that they have nothing to do with institutional care. And this is why I predict that in 15 to maximum 20 years, it's going to be next to impossible to run a CCI anymore. Because you're just not going to find the funding. You're not going to find individual foreign donors, and you're not going to get government money because the government cannot afford to give money if they can't get money from somewhere else because of that. So that was one of the arguments I used at Snehalaya. Do you want to wait until your back is against the wall and you don't have any choice? Or do you want to explore this when there is still room to move and time to explore and to discover how it works and whether it works for you? And that is why Snehalaya really got involved in this. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you, ma'am, for your beautiful sharing and your own experience as like transforming the system by taking simple steps which can be corrected at a moment. But while working in this, particularly in Snehalaya, or having your international experience and exposure, as a researcher, I also have this dilemma, like from where to begin, because somewhere we have start like from the local organization if you want to correct that, but sometimes they have also been part of the system, I mean government system or community. They've been also forced or pressurized by the system to follow the same what other organizations are following. Even they want to transform, they want to exist their existence, still they cannot do. And so in that, how do you think that the government role in this is very important, and how they will be shaping in that? Because the leadership is efficient, then only we can see the transformation in the ground. So do you have any experience on that, and do you have any experience and while working with the government system as well?
So it's definitely true that there are all kinds of levels at which you can work doing this, with or without government assistance. You're always going to have to look at what is in place, because obviously you always have to work within the law. And there are, in India, you've moved forward and it's been a great progress, but there are countries which actually have laws forbidding the things that are necessary to be able to move towards family-based care. So there, the first step has to be advocacy and lobbying towards law reform, to at least, if not actually putting in place systems for foster care, to at least scrap the parts that stand in its way. If those barriers are not there, then it really depends on your situation, on your resources, on your knowledge, what you are best of. Obviously, if you can cooperate with the government, the impact will be greater, because once they have seen a working pilot, the argument is usually it cannot be done. So the first step is to show it can by doing it. And that's why starting at the grassroots level is often quite helpful, even without any government involvement, just to prove that it can be done. You just have to be really, really careful to do it in a responsible way. It is a good idea along the way, even if you start at the grassroots level, to try and get as much government involvement as you can. And again, that can be at local level, at district level, at state level, at national level. Whatever you can get will help you, and if you get to one level, that will help you move to the next because of the connections that are there. Does that answer your question, more or less?
Thank you so much for your very informative discussion. I don't really have a question, but I just want your inputs into it. Like globally we see, and we also discussed, that there is no data available on children who live in institutions or children who are getting family-based care. So, and that's the case of India and even in Southeast Asia also. So what are your take on this? Like, what do you suggest? Like, how can we fill this lacuna? Because it is one area which prohibits us to give a solid background for government that we should do this or we should not do this.
Yes, that is a big problem. Last year I brought out a report which can be downloaded for free on my website, where I made an overview of the alternative care and child protection situation for all autonomous countries in the world. And it was a desk-based review, so I just gathered the data that is available. And as you say, there is in many areas a lack of data, or data is not comparable between different countries. One way that I'm working right now to do something about that is that I'm a member of Eurochild, a European network of organizations involved in child protection. And Eurochild is starting within Europe a data mapping strategy where they are looking at what kind of data on alternative care is available in which countries, what is the quality of that data, how is that data gathered, and to what extent is that data comparable. And out of that research, they want to try and provide guidelines on how to collect and manage useful data, which is also comparable, and they then hope that once they have that for about 30 countries in Europe, including some of the really poor European countries, that might also be applicable or can be expanded to a larger area. And I'm on the expert advisory committee for that research project.
Not a question actually, but you just mentioned, I want to reflect back, is culturally how much of a relevance it applies to us in our context. How important a child's role is in decision making. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
There is often the idea of, we'll decide for the child because the child is too small. But children do have opinions, and they have an insight in their own life that only they have. No one else has that insight. So, no, we cannot ask the child, shall we put you in foster care or shall we put you back into your family? That responsibility cannot be put on the child. But when we have gathered a lot of information that tells us a lot about the situation, we can say, okay, right now it looks like your uncle could take care of you or your aunt could take care of you. What do you think would work best for you, and why do you think that would be better? And if the child says, my aunt always makes me cry, then maybe the aunt is not the best solution. And this is not, a scientific analysis, but if the aunt always makes the child cry, then there is something going on there that's not really great. So in that sense, you do need to look, you can't put the responsibility on them. The final decision needs to lie with adults who have all the information. But the child's input is really important to be able to make the right decisions. The best interest of the child has to be at the core of everything we do. And unless we listen to a child, we cannot possibly know what their best interest is.
Agree?
From to CCI, how can all those children going to be the family based care? How? But there is large number of children. So how they can going CCI to family based care?
About 80 to 90% of children in CCIs have at least one living parent. Out of the rest of them, a large number have extended family members. So when we're looking at getting children out of CCIs and into family-based care, actually most of them are going back to their families. Their families just need support to be able to care for their children. And the perception is, oh, but this is going to be incredibly expensive. If we have to give support to all these poor families, the perception is that CCIs are a more efficient and cheaper way of taking care of these children. But that's a myth. It's an incredibly persistent myth, but it is quite simply false. Institutional care is 6 to 20 times more expensive than family-based care. And that's only talking about the day-to-day costs. That's not talking about the long-term results of a higher chance of being homeless, higher chance of being unemployed, higher chance of a criminal record, a higher chance of not being able to take care of their own children in the future, and those children ending up in care. All those things come with a lifelong cost to society. So it seems like, you know, having to pay for each of these children is an enormous amount of money, but in practice, once you start the transition, initially you're going to have to make an investment, because for a little while you run two parallel systems. The CCI is still there with all or most of the children still in it, and you're running a transition team with the first of the family-based options. But then the costs are going to go down because fewer children are going to be in the CCI. So the more expensive children have moved over to the cheaper side, and then the costs go down. And you end up, if you're smart, you reserve the same budget and you keep the money that you've been using for these children in the CCI at the same level, but you are then able to cater to far more children for the same amount of money.
Going outside for work and no one is there for taking care of them. And so if some money should be offered to family, then we will move that child into the family for family-based care. And one another, child's participation in decision making. If child is below 6 years, how he or she will be take the decision making? That is not possible. So best interest of the child, we'll think about that.
Moving children back to their family is never going to mean just bringing them to their family, waving and going away. Children are in CCIs for a reason, and the families will need support to take away the reason for which the child was sent to a CCI. So if a child was sent to a CCI because the parents need to work during the day, then there has to be daycare. Daycare needs to be set up so that a child doesn't need to be away from the parents day and night, so that they just need to be there in daycare while the parents are working. And as for decision making, as I said earlier, but I know you only came in later, so you may not have heard that part, the child will never have the final decision. That cannot be their responsibility. It's too much. They can't make that decision. But even a 3-year-old, you can get their reaction to certain things. You can't give them a very complicated theoretical situation, but you can, through play and through interaction at an age-appropriate level, get information about how they feel about certain things, and that can be very useful for making sure that you make the right decisions for them.